All right. Hi, everyone. I am Toluca from Markers and Minions.
Hi, I'm Jenna. I'm a special education teacher, and I work at her kids' school.
Yes. All right. So last week we talked about ways to introduce Unit 5 concepts to your students. We talked about creating an anchor chart with vocabulary, a visual, and big ideas for the unit. We talked about books that you can read to the students, read alouds to introduce topics. And we talked about 3 guiding questions that you could ask your students to get them to start reflecting on the topic. For example, one of them was like, what are some negative aspects about technology? I think it was like, how do you use technology? There were 3 of them that we went over, and we suggested posing those questions at the start of your unit when you're introducing it to get students thinking about the concepts. All right, so that unit introduction, that whole thing that we covered last week,
Right.
I like to do with my students the week before we get into the actual lessons for that unit. So say you are starting Unit 5, not this week, but next week. So this coming week, what you would do is take some time, like in the afternoons, while after you're wrapping up Unit 4, take some time to start introducing Unit 5. So that way when you get into the actual reading and the lessons, you don't have to then stop and provide background knowledge or define vocabulary or have those discussions that you want to have about a concept when you maybe don't have time for it, because you're trying to get into like spelling and close reading and stuff like that. So this week we're going to cover planning, and this is kind of like an old thing that I used to do in our Facebook group. Back when the Facebook group was like 1,000 members, every Sunday night we would plan, and we would use my free planning templates that I created that are still out there free on TPT to download. We'll provide you all with the link. But we would do that every Sunday, and it would end up being like this wonderful hour-long video where like tons of people would be watching, and we made friends. And I stopped doing them because they were a lot of work
And really long.
and just like I ended up having a second baby, so I was like, I just can't. So bringing it back today for Unit 5, and what we've done is we've actually already planned it.
Yeah.
Jenna's been here for about an hour and a half. We planned out the unit overview and Unit 5 Week 1. So we'll show you the completed planning templates already and kind of explain the thought process. That way we can kind of fast forward a little bit, so it's not an hour-long video. All right, so
We wanted to start with, the questions that we got. Yeah, so when we met last Sunday, we kind of put it out to you guys to say, like, are there any questions? So that way, if there was something, we could talk about it today before. So one of the questions that we got was, what are some tips for fitting it all in with a combo? So I think combos are more common. We don't really do that where I work, but I think maybe that's a California thing.
Well, I think it's like a post-pandemic thing too.
Yeah.
There are a lot more combos now. But I taught a combo several years back, like in probably 2017 or 2018. I had a 2-3 combo. And I was using these planning templates to help me plan. And what I would do was I would basically have the 3rd grade one and the 2nd grade one right in front of me. And I would do double the work because unfortunately there's no way around that part of it when you're planning. And I would then not just compare the lessons within one grade level over the course of the 3 weeks, I would compare those lessons also with the other grade level. So I would know what lessons, close reading lessons, were going to be the same for both grade levels. What was different? What could I combine and sit them all down together for versus what would I have to teach, like my 2nd graders separately while my 3rd graders were doing their centers. So I combined where I could. It was definitely not the majority of the time. Most of the time I had to keep it separate, but that was one thing that I did first. Then scheduling is key. So I did it so that I would ping pong. I would have one side of the room be one grade level working on their centers, the other side of the room with me doing a close reading lesson or whatever it is at their grade level. And then for centers, you could mix them up. This is another option. I didn't do this. You could mix them up so that they're both grade levels together. I've seen a lot of teachers talk about doing that. That's a little harder for me to wrap my brain around personally. Yeah. But if you want to teach everything in small groups, that's certainly a possibility as well. So scheduling is key, coming up with something that works. And then,
definitely planning ahead though. Definitely like seeing, Absolutely. You can't really, it's not really something where you can just walk in Monday morning and just wing it.
Yeah. And with my second graders and third graders, that combo class, I always made sure that my unit introduction chart covered both grade levels. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the planning went into creating that intro as well, because I wasn't going to do 2 intros, right. Because Benchmark's good about that, where you've got a lot of crossover between the unit concepts, which we talked about last week as well.
Right.
All right, so that was question number 1. I also have a blog post I can share about planning for a combo. Remind me to link that. Okay. All right. The second question was, are there comprehension resources like questions or lessons that I can use with the leveled books? Yes. So we have those leveled readers that come with Benchmark. And just so you know, you have access to all of the leveled readers across all of the grade levels. Right. So if you need to pull, like what you were talking about earlier, like if you need to pull a book from first grade and a book from 5th grade for your readers, if you've got a wide range, you can do that. You can provide that support to them.
Yeah, you don't have to reinvent it. It's already there for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there are lessons that come with those leveled readers provided by Benchmark. So if you go into into your materials, you'll see like an insert card that goes with them. There's close reading lessons. There's going to be a little bit of word study. There's writing. I like to access it online. When you open up the leveled reader, especially if you're going into another grade level, you open up that leveled reader, and then in the upper right hand corner, there's going to be a little white apple with a green background, and it says teacher resources. And then you've got 2 options once you click on that. You can print out the teaching materials, the guide, or text dependent questions that come for that leveled reader. So those are available online as well. And so there are a whole other set of lessons you can use.
Awesome. Yeah, especially for differentiation in small groups, reteach.
Yeah. And a lot of the times I just continued a lesson that I was already teaching whole class. Say I have a YouTube video actually of I have 2 of my day where I showed a video of me doing a guided reading lesson with my kids about drawing inferences. It was a Unit 3 lesson. And then afterwards, I recorded myself pulling a small group where we were using a level text, but we were doing the same, like a continuation, drawing inferences. And I even said, 10 minutes ago we were drawing inferences. Let's apply the same skill to what we're reading now. So in that instance, I didn't have to pull from the additional resources that Benchmark provided us with, and it worked out just fine.
Question 3. All right. When do you use the grammar and spelling book?
Yeah, so that handbook is good for centers, like independent practice, maybe send pages home, whatever. It's not meant for whole class lessons, practice. It's independent. All right, and last.
What about interventions?
Yeah, so a lot of teachers ask about intervention. We were talking about it earlier. Mm-hmm. In my district, we did not purchase the intervention component for Benchmark. There's a separate component. I don't know if they're still selling it separately or if it's included now. I have no idea. But I remember seeing it all these years ago in California. It looked like a condensed version of the whole group texts and lessons. I believe it, and don't quote me on this. I think that was the intervention component where it was like summarized paragraphs basically of the weekly text. Could have been ELD. But I don't know. This was years ago. So there is that, the intervention component. You could also use those level texts, pull from other grade levels if you're allowed to do that, and have that serve as intervention.
Yeah.
And then like we were talking about it, both of our schools did SIPs. So it was like an entirely different intervention program. They do SIPs and Haggerty, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So depending on where your students are, at my school, we have like a designated 30-minute intervention time every day. So if they're below grade level on their phonics, then we use SIPs and Haggerty. If they have the phonics part, but they're struggling maybe in comprehension or something like that, then we would use the small group text in a small group and kind of work on whatever skill is being taught in class. So we would just do that in a smaller group setting. So if it's below grade level, then you're using that as like a tier 3. But if it's on grade level, then it's just more of the core. So it would be a tier 2 intervention.
All right. Okay, so those were the main questions that were asked. If you have any questions as we're going over the planning templates, feel free to leave them in the comments, or even after this video has ended, if you're watching it at a later time, feel free to just leave them in the comments and we'll be happy to answer them for you. All right, so now we're going to switch on over to our doc cam. Now, I used the information from the TRS called the Comprehensive Literacy Planner. We are looking at 3rd grade, Unit 5 in the Florida edition, using this edition. There are going to be some differences if you're like in California or using a different edition, differences in lessons, text, and a little bit in the structure. But you will be able to apply this strategy and these templates to whatever grade level and whatever edition you're using. So basically, we just pulled the information from the 3 weeks and we took them and placed them on our planning templates. And for me, this was a really like clarifying and almost therapeutic practice back in the day when I was teaching benchmark, because I wanted to get out of the TRS. That was big for me, is like I didn't want to be the type of person that like carried around the TRS and needing it for all of my lessons. So as soon as I could pull everything out of it and close it and put it away, I was happy. So when I was planning, I was like, I need a separate piece of paper to pull these out and put these onto so I can see them side by side and then make decisions. So we come up with the essential question first, what's the value of innovation? And then I pull out all the close reading skills. So as you can see, for all 3 weeks, they're going to be in blue, and we've included the context clues or the build vocabulary lesson in blue as well. Now I have a key up here, and I have to say in Florida, this Florida edition that we're using, I haven't really had to make the sort of decisions that I used to have to make in California when we had like 7, 8 lessons a week where I just like, it wasn't possible. I had to combine, I had to get rid of stuff. In Florida, it seems really straightforward and like you maybe don't need to eliminate much or combine much. But this key is here if you do need to make those sorts of decisions. So this is great because now you can see the patterns. I see we're going to draw inferences in weeks 1 and 2 and not week 3. Author's purpose is going to be in weeks 1 and 2, not week 3. Text features is going to be in all 3 weeks. Structure is in 2 and 3. And we actually went in and looked at this. We saw that it's on cause and effect and sequence. So this is a text structure lesson. It's just on cause and effect. This one brings in sequence. So one thing you might think about or consider is like, hopefully the kids don't need a refresher, but if they might need a refresher before you start talking about sequence in week 2, because I don't see it coming up in week 1. You're still going to want to like go through these lessons and just make sure, but from just the lesson titles, I don't think we're going to be looking at sequencing. Okay. And then finally we have important, unimportant, weeks 1 and 3. And then here we have compare, contrast 2 authors with the same topic, 2 and 3. And then on week 3 in the Florida edition, you've got the poetry out loud. So that's a really great addition to the program. All right, and then we have context clues in weeks 1 and week 2. Week 3, I saw in the weekly planner that it does say that there's a context clues lesson, but I didn't notice it as a separate lesson, so that's just another, it's another thing to make a mental note of. And then we have our spelling for each week, our language. Here I have 2 because coordinating conjunctions is going to come up in one of your writing lessons. So you have your weekly grammar skill, but then one day when you're writing, you're going to be talking about that grammar idea as well. So it's just something to make a note of. And then in writing, you're going to be starting an opinion essay that's going to be worked on for all 3 weeks. But in week 1, it's going to go from brainstorming to organizing. Week 2 is all drafting. And week 3, you're going to take it from revision to publishing. All right, so that's a great snapshot. From there, we start to pull out these lessons and place them on our daily schedule. This is a schedule that worked for me, how I created it, how I wanted to do it with my students. You don't have to follow this. If you want to follow this, exactly what Benchmark has given you, that works too, right? They've basically done the same thing. I had to make a few changes to make it work for me personally. The first change you're going to see is on day 1. I did not do any close reading. Day 1 for Benchmark is drawing inferences. I knew that I didn't want to do that at all at the start of a week. Now, I have here introduce new unit, but if you follow like what I did, I technically did it the week before, right, with the anchor chart and everything. If you can't do that, then day 1's when you would introduce it. Now, we would introduce the first short read, which in this case is Dr. Shirley Jackson's Scientific Mind, and we would do the first and the second read, and this is just something that I made up called my 3 reads method. The first time we encountered a new text, I always read it to them first. It was really good for modeling fluency and intonation and phrasing, just like good reading. And I did not stop to clarify vocabulary, build background, or anything like that. I just read right through it. And then immediately after, I would have the students do a second read of it on their own or with a partner, where they read and they write down their own annotations. Mm-hmm. So this would be like circle unfamiliar words, put a star next to something that might be important, put a question mark next to things that are confusing or you have a question about, etc. So it could be their own little symbols. I just wanted them to interact with the text. And then from there, that was it. We did not jump into actually analyzing the text. We go into a mini lesson for spelling and grammar, which in Benchmark, they don't suggest doing that until day 2 and day 3. So spelling, grammar. I moved this to day 1, just quick mini lessons, because I knew I wanted my students to practice spelling and grammar all week in their centers with some sort of center material. So I knew I needed to teach it day 1. And then right after that, we'd go into introducing the writing for the week. So in week 1, we saw that it was brainstorm your opinion about a type of technology, but it was kind of confusing, right, Jenna?
Yeah, we didn't really see where it actually it wasn't really like right there.
A right there prompt.
Yeah, so we kind of just came up with one that we thought maybe fit, and definitely if you followed what we did last week, what we had talked about last week, what are some negatives of technology, and we think the kids could have a lot of opinions about those, and maybe feel like really strongly about that, so it might lend itself well to this opinion piece.
Mm-hmm. A good connection. All right, and then in day 2, we would immediately start with reviewing the vocabulary that the students circled when they were reading it on their own. I never followed a formal lesson. I just did a context clues lesson. Students would tell me what they circled. We would read around it, find clues in there. We'd talk about, or maybe it wasn't context clues, maybe it was roots, maybe it was, whatever. We would come up with ways to determine the meaning together. In this case, for this week, lesson 13 is an explicit context clues lesson. So you could try and pull from that. And then we would go into our first close reading lesson. So we've already read it, they've heard it, they've read it themselves. Now we're going to close read a portion of it. So that's that first lesson, but I'm doing that on day 2. So you notice everything kind of shifts because I had to accommodate these on day 1. And then we would do our writing lesson. Now day 3 and day 4, this looks really crazy. This is, it's more organized when it's like the California edition. I had to kind of tweak things for Florida. But what I would do is we would do the next close reading lesson. Then we would do our word study text, which is in the California edition. I don't really see that in the Florida version. You don't have a separate text for word study. They want you to go back into short read number 1 for word study. And then it looked like you have this short Amazing Grace text specifically for vocabulary. So you could either push this to day 4 or have this be something that they do in a center, because otherwise this day is really packed for you. Because you've got basically 2 lessons to squeeze in here instead of versus California when we had 2 close reading lessons on day 4. All right, so since you're doing author's purpose and text features, you might consider introducing your next text from phone calls to video chat to day 4. So that's why I drew that little arrow. Alternatively, you can see here, I wrote, this could be quick, this text features lesson, because we know that it comes up in weeks 2 and weeks 3 again. So we don't really, I mean, if you're pressed for time, you can kind of take some of that pressure off knowing that it's coming up again and again. So then we would do the next day, we'd introduce that next text, do the first read, the second read, go over those annotations, and then go right into that third read, important versus unimportant information, which would be lesson 10. And then you could follow that up with the next lesson, which is cause effect. That seems like it might be congested that day, so that's entirely up to you. And then you have your writing. And then on day 5, I have here that you squeeze in that lesson. And then your writing lesson, fortunately, focuses on grammar, so it's not going to be too huge of a lesson because your week 1 assessment is going to take up some time. So the week 1 assessment, I sometimes would give that like first thing in the morning, before we even got into ELA, or in the afternoons once we were done with ELA. It's kind of a lot to fit into your block, but if you can do it, then that's amazing.
So it wouldn't necessarily take your ELA time for that day.
Yeah.
You would find other places.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had that flexibility, so I can't speak for others, but I was able to at least. So comparing this to the week 1 planner here, you've got your intro lesson, comprehension, 2 comprehensions, and then this is also comprehension, is that context clues, which I basically eliminated or combined it with the reviewing vocabulary from student annotations, which we do anyway if you're doing the 3 reads method, which I think is valuable because I always want to review vocabulary on a text after my students read it, regardless of if there's a lesson about it or not, which is why I also pull it out here, because I want to see, like, okay, when can I fall back on a lesson in the program made for me, and when do I have to just rely on my own routine? All right. So after doing week 1, you would go in and do weeks 2 and weeks 3. It's pretty much an identical planning template. And these templates this one specifically is for grades 2 through 6. Included in this download, which is free on my TPT, there's also one separate for K1. So there's it looks a little bit different because you're gonna, if you're in K1, you have different types of lessons each day. So that's going to be in there for you as well.
And these pages are also in the planner, right?
Yeah, so I have that right here. So if you have my planner, let me just show you what that looks like. Let's do a little compare contrast. Here's the unit overview horizontal. In the planner, here it is vertically. I had to make it vertical. So that's what that looks like. And then this is what it looks like
daily.
Yeah, or week 1 with the daily breakdown. All right, so same type of thing.
Organized.
Yeah. All right, so let's switch back. I hope that was helpful. Again, I didn't want to take you through like an hour-long session about it, but if that is something that you feel would be beneficial to you, certainly let me know. I've started like doing one-on-ones, so if that's something interesting to you, just reach out, let me know. And if you've got any other questions, just send them our way.
Next week we're meeting to talk about, so the 22nd, to talk about projects that you can plug in for more fun. Yesterday, the Design Your Own App got a lot of good feedback, so that's one of the things we'll be talking about, and other things just to make the units more fun and engaging for your students.
Yeah, and Unit 5 is one where I go all out. It always coincided with our open house, which like is crazy at my school, or at my previous school. Our walls were expected to be like completely covered, so I came up with a lot of Unit 5 stuff that crossed over into art, math, everything. So we'll talk about it all next week.
Lorax, so it's fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. We hope this was helpful, and we'll see you next Sunday.
Bye.